I still remember the taste of copper on my tongue the day they told me I had been chosen. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, a slip of ink on a data slate. After all, I was nobody. A factory worker, a man with oil-stained hands and a scar from a broken grinding wheel. Yet, in the Imperium of man, no summons arrives by mistake. They called it sacred service, a phrase whispered in the lower hives like a prayer and a curse. Everyone had heard the rumors citizens taken into the depths of the imperial palace, never to return. We told ourselves they were blessed, but in the silence of our quarters, we knew better. That night, as the walls seemed to press closer and the recycled air stung of metal, I began to understand my life was no longer my own. I tried to swallow, but the copper taste wouldn't leave. It clung to the back of my tongue like a thin blade, a reminder that the words I'd heard weren't a nightmare I could wake from. Selected for sacred service. The phrase rattled inside my skull, too polished to belong to a life like mine. I kept turning it over, as if a different angle might change the meaning. It didn't. The hab corridor outside my unit breathed in mechanical sighs, the vents exhaling air that smelled faintly of bleach and hot metal. I stood there longer than I should have, palm pressed to the panel, reluctant to let the door recognize me. When it finally slid open, the stale warmth of my room wrapped around me, 8 meters by 6, the same color as every hallway, that bureaucratic beige that pretends not to exist. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it until the recycled chill crept through the plating and into my skin. I set my tool bag on the cot and watched the cot springs tremble as if they were nervous too. My hands were still black at the creases, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Machine oil lives in a man's skin like a second blood. I rubbed my thumb against my scar, the shallow curved line on the left cheek, a souvenir from a grinding wheel that leapt when it shouldn't have, and tried to imagine the adept had made a mistake. Somewhere in the palace, a data slate had stuttered, an algorithm hiccuped, a digit fell sideways and turned someone else's fate into mine. The wall chrono ticked toward 1900 with its polite, insistent blink. 47 minutes. Enough time to eat red prey, run enough time to fail at all of it. I opened the food unit and the familiar brick slid into my hand. Corpse starch pressed and perfumed with something that thought pork was a memory no one would challenge. I bit once and chewed until the paste went from salty to ash. Hunger retreated, but did not concede. I tossed the rest into the disposal and watched the unit's orange coils burn my appetite away. I pulled the drawer where I kept the primer and 3 dog-eared booklets of regulations, then closed it again. The words would not sit still today. They would swim and tangle, and I would end at the same place, a paragraph that promised the Emperor's hand was on every shoulder, even those kneeling at an edge they couldn't see. On the desk, the only item I owned that might be called personal, sat a pict frame with 2 faces that belonged to another Terra. My parents on their wedding day. My mother wearing a dress that looked like it had taken love and time. My father too young for his serious jaw. The image had a warmth my room never learned. I lifted the frame, and the glass was cool, and for a moment, the noise outside faded, the hum of vents and distant tram lines becoming a single steady note. What would they say if they were here? Would my father speak duty first, the way he did when he taught me to replace a belt and said, "The machine runs because you don't fail it"? Would my mother pull me close and smooth my hair and lie beautifully about miracles? The taste of copper edged back. I set the frame down and sat on the cot. The mattress stank faintly of solvent. I had spilled cleaner 2 days ago, and the hab hadn't forgiven me. The ceiling panels watched scarred with the small geography I'd mapped over the years, 63 dents, 12 rust blossoms. One panel misaligned so slightly it was a secret between us. I counted them again because numbers asked nothing in return. Mystery is heavy when it has nowhere to go. Sacred service had weight. The words weren't a summons to labor or training or a penal shift. They were ceremonial, almost tender, like a hand on the back, guiding you toward a door you don't see. In the lower hives, we told each other stories, because stories are currency when light is short. Some people, the lucky, the pious, The desperate whispered that those chosen entered a holiness too bright for the common man. Others, with eyes that didn't blink enough, said there were rooms beneath Terra where machines drank souls the way furnaces drink air. We laughed at that in public. In private, we didn't. I tried the transport schedule on my slate, though my route had already been sent Sanctum level Omega 33 1900. The map showed a vertical thread through strata I only knew by rumor. The architects of the palace had drawn a city that 8 other cities, stacked them inside itself, and taught them to hum like organs. Somewhere below, incense would replace disinfectant. Somewhere above, banners would move in currents that never touched us. I was a dot that would drop through layers, and the map didn't have symbols for what waited. I washed my hands at the tiny sink until the water went from cool to animal cold. The soap was the institutional kind that leaves your skin clean and ashamed. I dried with the rag on the hook and looked at myself in the mirror's tired silver. 34. A hairline learning humility. Eyes that had learned how to look without asking. A man you'd pass 1,000 times and never remember. It felt obscene to imagine that a machinery vast enough to thread 1,000,000 worlds would pause for me. Horror arrives quietly when it is administrative. The adept's voice had been flat, practiced kind only in the way a blade is kind when it is sharp. Your genetic markers, your resonance levels, your psychological profile. The categories stripped me to inventory potential energy inside tissue numbers that promised usefulness. I tried not to feel the insult nestled inside the honor I had been chosen, not because I was me, but because a table somewhere liked the way my cells sang. The hab walls seemed to push inward, millimeter by millimeter, as if the building itself wanted me to move. I put on my best coveralls, the ones with fewer patches and a name stencil that hadn't flaked. I cleaned under my nails with a sliver of scrap until the crescents shone pale. I sat, stood, sat again. I reached for the picked frame and pulled back. I didn't want to remember them as a thing I held. I wanted to be remembered as something they would have held. On impulse, I stepped back into the corridor. The vents breathed. Somewhere, a child chalked a crooked aquila on a wall, and a mother corrected the angle of one wing. A neighbor I barely knew, Big Hand's kind face, nodded once, then twice when he saw the summons band on my wrist. He said nothing. The silence was heavier than any blessing. I walked to the common balcony at the end of the hall. Terra's sky was not a sky in any way you'd recognize from old pics. It was a ceiling of stone and metal, and prayer striated with tram lines and studded with light wells that pretended at stars. Far beyond toward the palace's direction, I could feel more than see a mass like a mountain pretending to be a building. Pilgrims moved in processions like veins of color in granite. Servo skulls drifted on pilgrim air, their lenses red as cauterized wounds. In that moment, the scale of it pressed into me. The Imperium wasn't a nation you belonged to. It was a logic that claimed you the way gravity does. Epic isn't loud. Sometimes it's a pressure behind your ribs, a knowledge that you are a point on a line that stretches beyond sight. I placed my palm flat against the rail and felt the tremor of the city, the endless low-frequency thrum of generators and prayer wheels and lift pistons synchronizing their small absolutes into a single long note. I imagined that note passing through me and continuing down into levels where I'd never dared to go, where scholars wore red, and spoke to engines where gold-armored giants stood motionless, where the Emperor's shadow existed even if his body did not. I returned to my room when the chrono drew a straight sword of light across 1900. I didn't lock the door behind me. Superstition, maybe. Or courtesy, as if leaving it open might tell the room it could forget me faster. I took the pictoframe in both hands and pressed my mouth to the glass, brief, clumsy a prayer in a language only the desperate learn. I set it down upright and wiped the smudge away. No traces, no mess for whoever inventory would send to clear the unit. I hated the thought of a stranger touching my things, confused by how little there was. The chime sounded once, soft, final. Mystery had done its work, Horror had moved into the empty rooms it made. But a thin, stubborn thing inside me, something my father might have called dignity, and my mother might have called faith, uncoiled and stood up. I smoothed my coveralls, squared the seam at my collar, and forced my shoulders back. If a machine had chosen me for the music of my cells, then I would walk as if I were more than numbers. I would walk as if there were eyes on me that expected a man not meet. I palmed the panel, and the door opened like an exhale. The corridor waited, humming its long note, and somewhere far below the word sanctum had already decided it would mean what I found when I got there. I stepped out, and the door whispered shut behind me, and I did not look back. The descent ended with a sigh of hydraulics. For a heartbeat, the capsule was silent, except for our breathing, shallow and uneven. Then the doors slid apart, and the air that spilled in was different. It carried incense so thick, it stung the eyes, mingled with something raw ozone and scorched metal. The corridor beyond was not a hallway. It was a throat swallowing us whole. The tech adepts in their red robes beckoned with skeletal precision. Brass masks hid their faces, but not their indifference. We followed like prisoners, led to a place our minds had not yet defined. Statues lined the walls, saints carved in postures of agony and ecstasy. Their stone eyes rolled skyward, as if salvation had fled long ago. The light flickered in shallow alcoves, throwing shadows that seemed to breathe. The deeper we walked, the louder it became. The hum beneath the floor, the murmur of machinery vast enough to have moods. Somewhere inside the walls, titanic engines dreamed their voices, leaking through stone like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. We turned a corner and entered a chamber that stole the air from my lungs. At first glance, it was a cathedral, a dome arched so high it dissolved into shadow. Thrones circled the room in tier upon tier, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and on those thrones sat people, alive. Their chests rose and fell, their skin glistened with sweat, but their eyes were gone, rolled back, or frozen wide in blindness. Tubes pierced their arms, their necks, their skulls. Crystalline growths spread across their bodies, glowing with a light that pulsed in rhythm with something deeper than breath. They were not corpses, but they were no longer people. The adepts spoke at last. Their vox grills made the words sound as if they rose from wells beneath the earth. Behold the preparatory chambers of sacred service. Here the faithful are transformed. Here individual existence ends and true purpose begins. Horror spread across the faces of my companions. Mira clutched her Aquila pendant until her knuckles whitened. Marcus swore under his breath. The boy Jarn simply stared, lips trembling, eyes drowning in reflections of light that came from nowhere and everywhere. I wanted to run, but the chamber itself seemed to forbid it, the walls pressing us toward revelation. One of the adepts gestured toward the central dais. There, towering above the lesser thrones, rose a seat carved from black material that seemed to drink the light. Tubes thicker than a man's waist fed into its base, disappearing into the floor. Crystalline structures jutted like tumors, pulsing with malignant radiance. It was alive in some dreadful way, and I felt its attention like the gaze of a predator. My knees weakened, and I understood instinctively this was no machine. It was a hunger-given form. Marcus whispered what we were all afraid to say. "What happens to them?" The adept's mask turned brass eyes, staring through us. They become part of the Emperor's great work. Their life force, their psychic potential, their very souls are channeled into the Astronomicon, the beacon that guides humanity through the warp, the light that holds back the abyss. It must be fed always, without pause. My breath caught. The Astronomicon, the holy flame every child of Terra learns about, in lullabies the miracle that kept ships from vanishing into madness. I had pictured it as a tower of golden light fueled by prayer and faith. But the truth lay before me, 1,000 souls a day burned into fuel for an empire too vast to comprehend. The sacred flame was not a miracle. It was a furnace, and humanity itself was the coal. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of a railing to steady myself. Horror flooded me, yet beneath it a cold awe settled. We had always known that survival demanded sacrifice, but this was sacrifice transformed into infrastructure. The bones of an entire species welded into a single beam of light. It was obscene. It was magnificent. Mira sobbed softly, whispering prayers. Jarn whimpered like a child too young to have been chosen. Senna's face hardened into lines of rage, her fists clenched as if she might strike the adepts themselves. Marcus muttered, "Worked with fire all my life. Figures I'd end as fuel." Their words floated around me like fragments of a hymn I didn't want to hear. Mystery had been shattered, replaced by horror. But horror, I realized, was only the first layer. Beyond it loomed something epic, the recognition that this machine, this abattoir of souls, had carried humanity for 10 millennia. Every colony founded, every fleet rescued from the storms of the warp, every child born beneath alien suns, all of it bought here in chambers where screams became navigation. Billions had died to keep the light burning, and billions more would follow, including me. I thought of my parents' photograph, the way they had smiled as if the future were generous. I imagined them standing in this chamber seeing what I now saw. Would they recoil in horror, or would they bow grateful that their son had been found worthy of such a fate? Pride and terror braided inside me until I couldn't tell them apart. The adepts continued their chant-like explanations, but I barely heard. My gaze fixed on the central throne. For an instant, I thought I saw movement within its crystalline matrix, a flicker, a suggestion of a face. Not mechanical, human, watching, weeping. The realization struck with the weight of a falling world. The Emperor himself was entombed within this horror, sustained by it, commanding it, and perhaps mourning it. If so, then every scream that rose from these thrones was not unheard. It was shared. A shiver crawled down my spine. Horror gave way to something larger, a tragic grandeur that was impossible to look at directly. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was necessity, weaponized survival, sharpened into ritual. The Imperium endured because here, in this chamber, humanity itself was ground into light. There was no turning away, no refusal, only the knowledge that soon my body would be another husk, my soul another note in the endless choir that held the galaxy together. Catharsis came not as relief, but as resignation. The terror still throbbed in my chest, but beneath it a strange calm grew. To die here was monstrous. To die here was magnificent. My life would be obliterated, yet in that obliteration I would become part of something eternal. The Astronomicon was not a miracle. It was us, all of us, and soon it would be me. The adepts moved with the precision of machines, their robes whispering against the stone, as if the fabric itself obeyed liturgy. One raised a clawed hand, and we understood it was time. Time for the whispers of sacred service to harden into flesh and pain. Time for mystery to become horror. Mira was first. She stood on trembling legs, clutching her Aquila pendant so tightly that blood welled from the cuts it made in her palm. Her lips moved in silent prayer, her eyes darting from face to face, looking for something comfort absolution, a witness. When the adepts guided her to the throne, she resisted only for a moment, then sat as if exhaustion itself had decided for her. Needles slid into her arms with surgical inevitability, tubes attached to her neck and spine. Then came the crystalline filaments reaching out from the throne like hungry roots. When they touched her skull, her body convulsed. She screamed, and the sound was not merely pain, it was surrender torn from a soul that had no escape. For a heartbeat, her eyes met mine, wide and imploring. Then they rolled back, showing only the whites. Her voice cut off, as if swallowed. Connection established, the adept intoned, as if reading from a ledger. Soul integration, 97% efficiency. Mira was gone, dissolved into the choir that hummed beneath the floor. Marcus went next. The old fuel processor rose with surprising steadiness. He glanced once at us, then muttered, "Worked with fire all my life." Fitting. I should become fire in the end. His tone was flat, almost casual, like a man accepting a final shift he knew would kill his lungs, but keep the factory running. He lowered himself into the throne, and when the needles found him, he didn't flinch. His transformation was quieter, less violent, but no less final. One moment he was Marcus Thorn, bearer of scars and decades. The next, he was a node in the great machine. His presence, I realized, was still there, faint but steady, like a coal still glowing in the ashes. Epic dignity inside horror. Helena followed, barely 18, with hands that had known nothing but fabric and quotas. She shook as the adepts guided her forward, whispering that she didn't want to die, that she hadn't seen the upper spires, that she still dreamed of colors, not stamped by manufactorums. Her sobs filled the chamber, childlike and pure. When the filaments invaded her nervous system, her cry was shrill and sharp, then abruptly cut off. She slumped her body, small against the throne's vastness, horror sharpened by youth. Dmitri went after her, middle-aged, an augment arm betraying his years of servitude to machines. He clenched his fists, the servos in his arm, whining like a chorus of insects. "How do you choose?" he demanded again. Though no answer came, they strapped him down anyway, and when the crystalline veins pierced his skull, he spat curses until his voice dissolved into silence. His final word was no, stretched out until it became nothing. He had been defiant, but even defiance was fuel. Yarn, the boy from the youth brigades, was next. He tried to run bolting toward the doors with the blind panic of an animal, but the custodian guards didn't even move. They didn't need to. An adept extended a hand, and a flash of electricity dropped Yarn to the ground, twitching. They lifted him as if he weighed nothing. His sobs were raw, his words barely coherent. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." They strapped him in, and his transformation was the most violent, yet his body jerking foam bubbling at his lips. His scream was high and broken, then muffled into nothingness. He became silence. He became fuel. Mystery had long since died, only horror remained. Senna, the agridome worker, was last before me. She walked with defiance, her weathered hands clenched. 40 years I spent coaxing life from poisoned soil, she spat. And this is my reward? To feed a machine? The adept replied without emotion. Your essence will guide ships across the galaxy. Your sacrifice will preserve millions of lives. What greater purpose could any individual serve? The purpose of living, she hissed. And yet she sat, because refusal was not possible. When the filaments dug into her, she screamed curses, a storm of fury that echoed through the chamber. Her body convulsed longer than the others, as if even in dissolution she fought. The readings on the adept's instruments fluctuated wildly. She was still fighting when her eyes rolled back, her mouth frozen in a final snarl. Horror transfigured into defiance, defiance into tragedy. I watched them fall one by one, and each fall stripped away another layer of the man I had been. Mystery had brought me here. Horror had shown me the thrones. Now epic pressed against my chest like a weight. The realization that every one of them, from the sobbing girl to the scarred old man, had become part of the Astronomicon, the holy light that stretched across the galaxy. They were gone, but not gone. Their screams, their defiance, their small, ordinary lives had become starlight, tragic grandeur wrapped in machinery. And now it was my turn. I stood on trembling legs. The adepts gestured. The throne waited its crystalline tumors, pulsing like the veins of a predator. I glanced once at my companions, at Mira, at Marcus, at Helena, at Yarn, at Senna. They were still there, their bodies breathing, their eyes blank, their souls singing in a register I could almost hear. Horror throbbed in my throat, but beneath it something else stirred catharsis, not of peace, but of inevitability. I was next, and the machine would not be denied. When they turned toward me, I felt my knees weaken. The adepts didn't need to speak. Their brass masks tilted in perfect unison, and the motion was command enough. My feet carried me forward as though the floor itself had decided for me. Every step echoed too loudly, a hollow drumbeat that sounded like a countdown. The throne was alive. That was the first truth that struck me. It pulsed with light, not reflected, but generated a sickly radiance that seeped into my bones. Its crystalline growths reached toward me with the hunger of a predator's jaw. I wanted to recoil, to scream, but my body obeyed a deeper law. The Emperor's will cannot be denied. They guided me into the seat. Cold restraints locked across my arms and legs, mechanical arms snapping shut like jaws. The throne's surface was not stone or metal. It was organic somehow, like muscle disguised as machinery. It throbbed faintly beneath me. My heart stuttered in rhythm with it, as if sinking against my will. The needles came next. They pierced with surgical inevitability, one into the arm, two into the neck, another through the temple. The pain was white-hot, immediate, but bearable. What came after was not. The crystalline filaments reached from the central throne and found me. When they touched my skull, every nerve in my body erupted, as if I had been set ablaze from the inside. I screamed, and the sound was stolen from me, shredded by the chamber, until it became part of the hum beneath the floor. In that moment, I understood this was not death. This was consumption. My soul was being taken apart thread by thread, catalogued, stripped of individuality, prepared for use. And then I felt it, something vast, ancient, and impossibly heavy pressing into my mind, a presence that dwarfed me as the sky dwarfs an ant. It wasn't the cold machine logic of the adepts. It was something older, something human, yet far beyond humanity. I am sorry. The words didn't come through ears or lips. They bloomed directly inside me, bypassing all senses. A voice layered with sorrow, carrying the weight of 10,000 years of regret. Mystery gave way to revelation. This was no machine's whisper. It was him, the Emperor, or a fragment of him bound inside this horror, witnessing everything. My thoughts stuttered. Was I hearing God apologize? I am so very sorry. Images flooded me, memories that weren't mine, unrolling like tapes through a projector, ancient wars fought with weapons older than Terra's oldest cities, fleets stretching across galaxies, the heresy that tore humanity in two. I saw it all as if I had lived it, each scene burned into me with unbearable clarity, and beneath every vision, sorrow. Not the cold pity of a god looking down on ants, but the raw grief of a man who had seen too much blood, demanded too much sacrifice, and endured too much silence. Why I croaked, though, I couldn't tell if my lips had moved or if the word was thought alone. In answer, more visions. Ships drifting blind through the warp, their crews driven mad by whispers of chaos. Colonies falling one by one, cut off from each other, swallowed by Xenos swarms or heretic flames. A galaxy without the Astronomicon, a galaxy without hope. The price is too high, I whispered inside myself. Yes, the Emperor's fragment replied, but the alternative is worse. I felt his mind strain under the weight of calculation probabilities unfurling like endless equations. Each variable was a life, a planet, a future. Each equation ended with extinction unless the Astronomicon remained lit. That light was not powered by faith alone. It was powered by us, by me. Horror gave way to something larger. I was seeing through his eyes now, glimpsing the galaxy as a living map, a million worlds glowing like sparks in the void, ships crawling between them, on arteries of starlight, humanity strung together across the dark. And all of it, the entire miracle of existence, anchored here in this chamber, where screams became illumination. I felt him grieve each soul. He knew our names. He remembered our faces. Every worker, every farmer, every child turned into fuel had passed through him, and he carried them all. The choir of the dead was not forgotten. It was the library of humanity, etched into his divine consciousness. I am not blind to your suffering, he whispered. I endure it with you. Each day diminishes me. Each sacrifice wounds me. But without it, everything ends. Tears welled unbidden in my eyes, not because he demanded them, but because his sorrow was too immense to contain. I had always pictured the Emperor as unyielding eternal steel. Instead, I found something far more tragic, a god who felt every wound of his people and bore them alone. The pain of my integration dulled, replaced by a strange warmth. My memories flickered before me like lanterns. My first day at the Manufactorum. The girl I had loved for 3 fleeting weeks. The taste of real food during a rare feast day. The sound of rain on a hab roof. Each moment cataloged, then folded into something larger. They weren't being erased. They were being preserved within him. Catharsis arrived not as peace, but as inevitability accepted. I was no longer just Kalen Voss factory worker from Sector Gamma 7. I was becoming part of a chorus that stretched across 10 millennia. My small life with all its scars and oil-stained hands would burn inside the Astronomicon. And through that fire, humanity would endure one more day. As the last of my resistance unraveled, I heard his voice one final time, softer than breath, heavy with both gratitude and damnation. You are not forgotten. You never will be. You are part of me now, and I am part of you. The light consumed me. Horror and awe fused into one. Mystery had ended. Epic tragedy had begun, and in that tragedy, a strange salvation. The moment my consciousness cracked open, I thought I was dying. Not dying as in breath faltering or blood spilling, but as if the concept of I itself was dissolving. My memories streamed away like sand through broken fingers. Faces, sounds, sensations, each slipped into a current too strong to resist. For an instant, terror clawed at me. I wanted to scream my own name to hold on to something that was mine. But the current carried me, and in its depths I realized I was not falling alone. Other presences touched me. Mira was there. Her prayers no longer whispered but woven into a rhythm that steadied the torrent. Marcus's iron steadiness pressed against my fear, a coal of endurance glowing through the dark. Helena's youthful fragility stretched into something brighter, a thin but piercing note in the vast symphony. Yarn's panic still throbbed, but even that was pulled into balance, softened by countless others. Senna's defiance raged like a storm, but even storms became patterns when absorbed by something so vast. We were not individuals anymore. We were voices in a choir, and the choir was endless. Millions, no billions of souls stretched behind us like stars. Their presence surrounded me, an ocean of memory, sorrow, courage, and sacrifice. It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it was strangely comforting. My terror dulled, replaced by awe. The horror was still there. I could feel the pain of integration echoing like a wound that never healed, but it had been transfigured. The agony of one became the rhythm of many. Each scream blended into a harmony that reached beyond pain, beyond individuality. We were fuel, yes, but we were also foundation. Humanity's survival rested on our voices. Then came the vision. Through the choir's perception, I saw the galaxy as I had never imagined. Lines of light threaded across the void arteries of the Astronomicon, stretching from Terra to the most distant colonies. Ships crawled along them like blood cells, through veins. Each one carried lives, children, families, workers, soldiers, all of them moving through darkness, guided by us. Every safe arrival, every world connected to the Imperium existed because of this chorus of sacrifice. Mystery transformed into revelation. The Astronomicon was not an abstract beacon. It was us. The sum of every soul burned into its fire. The light was not holy because it descended from heaven. It was holy because it was built from humanity itself. I felt the Emperor's fragment again, but now from within rather than without. His mind stretched across us like a conductor leading the symphony, vast, incomprehensible, but tinged with sorrow. He did not rule us as a tyrant. He wove us together memory by memory, fear by fear, until we became a single living flame, and through him we touched everything. I sensed distant battles, planets aflame with war. I felt the shrieks of chaos pressing at the edges of reality, only to recoil against the light we fed. I felt orc warbands gathering their brutal laughter, echoing across space, checked only by the brilliance of our flame. I felt the tyrannid hunger gnawing at the rim of the galaxy, frustrated by the wall of fire we sustained. Every threat, every nightmare pressed against humanity, and we held the line with our very essence. It was horror on a scale too large for language. Billions of us reduced to fuel voices, stripped of flesh, bound into an engine. And yet it was also epic in a way that shook my soul. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be part of the Imperium, not banners or creeds or duty, but sacrifice so vast it became indistinguishable from divinity. Catharsis came as warmth. I realized I had not lost myself entirely. My memories were still mine, preserved within the Emperor's vast mind. My father's voice telling me machines run because men don't fail them. My mother's hand smoothing my hair. The girl I had loved for 3 weeks, her laughter echoing in a corner of my soul. They were still here, but now they were his too. Nothing was wasted, nothing forgotten. Every life burned into the Astronomicon became another reason to endure, another fragment of humanity preserved. The epic scope did not erase the tragedy, it magnified it. For every ship that reached its port safely, 1,000 screams had been silenced in chambers like mine. For every child born beneath alien skies, 1,000 lives had been drained to light the way. The Imperium was not built on miracles, it was built on corpses. And yet those corpses sang. I no longer felt my body. Needles restraints flesh, those belonged to a man named Colin Voss, and he was gone. What remained was a thread in a tapestry, a note in an eternal hymn. It was not the oblivion I had feared. It was belonging, terrible, beautiful belonging. The choir swelled and I swelled with it. Our combined will cut through the warp like a blade of light. I felt ships change course, navigators adjusting to currents only we could reveal. I felt lives saved because we endured. The horror was still there, the knowledge that 1,000 more would be strapped to thrones tomorrow. But in that horror lay catharsis. Our deaths were not meaningless. They were survival given form. And as I sank deeper into the chorus, I realized the truth the adepts could never explain. We were not simply fuel. We were the Imperium itself, its arteries, its pulse, its breath. Every scream was a prayer. Every memory was a hymn. Every life extinguished became a star in the Emperor's infinite constellation. I was no longer Colin Voss. I was the light of mankind. At first, I thought the tremors were part of us, the endless choir shivering with the strain of holding back the warp. But then I realized the vibration was coming from deeper still. The golden throne itself was changing. For 10,000 years it had endured. Its foundations, built in an age of forgotten science, had hummed like a patient heart, drinking 1,000 souls a day without faltering. Now that hum stuttered, faltered, grew louder. Something was stirring, and it was not merely hunger. I felt it through the web of souls, Mira's prayers, breaking into confusion, Marcus's steady flame flickering, Senna's defiance surging as if she sensed a chance to strike. Across the choir, billions of voices shuddered. Some thought it was failure. Some thought it was the end. But beneath the terror was something else, anticipation. The Emperor's fragment stirred. His sorrowful presence, which had always lain like a heavy hand across us, now tightened into something sharper, fiercer. The time has come. His voice whispered, not to me alone, but to every soul in the choir. Hold fast. Endure one more fire. The price will be paid, and then the burden lifted. Mystery surged. None of us understood what he meant. The throne was our prison, our altar, our engine. How could there be anything beyond it? Then came the horror. The golden throne began to consume more than the usual tithe. Threads of light that bound us together brightened into white fire. Pain ripped through me, through all of us, as if our very essences were being burned raw. Voices screamed in unison, a harmony of agony that stretched across the galaxy. Some souls winked out, entirely extinguished in an instant, their light folded into something larger. I felt myself unraveling faster. Memories that had remained my father's hands, the sound of rain the girl I once loved flickered, then dimmed. The thought of losing them again tore at me worse than death. Yet, in the torrent, I felt the Emperor's presence steady us. "Not lost," he whispered, transformed. The horror was unbearable, yet within it was revelation. For 10 millennia, we had been sustaining a machine that barely clung to function. The adepts had patched and prayed, offering more blood, more souls to keep its ancient engines humming. But it was dying, and the Emperor had known all along. "You have paid enough." His voice thundered, now stronger than I had ever felt it. 10,000 years of sacrifice, 10,000 years of blood. The throne is finished. I will rise again. Epic grandeur flooded me. For the first time, the Emperor was no longer a fragment. His presence filled every corridor of the choir, every filament of light. He was no longer sorrow contained. He was will unchained. I felt the throne's ancient systems crack its crystal spires, splintering its conduits, melting. The adepts screamed as their sacred machine betrayed them. Brass masks shattered as the chamber quaked, lightning pouring from the core. And then he rose, not physically, not with limbs of flesh, but as something greater. The Emperor's consciousness, once anchored and chained, surged outward. He was no longer bound to the throne. He was the throne, and the throne was breaking, so he could be free. The warp itself shuddered. I felt it through the Astronomican storms of madness, recoiling demons shrieking as reality pressed them back. Chaos fleets stalled as their drives sputtered, their ships rejected by space itself. Tyrannid hive minds recoiled, their hunger frustrated by a fire they could not devour. Even the orcs paused in their wars, their laughter silenced by a presence too vast to ignore. The Emperor was becoming something new, something terrifying. Not the half-dead husk on a gilded chair, but a god ascending to true divinity. His voice thundered across us. "You are not my fuel. You are my foundation. Every memory, every scream, every sacrifice has built this moment. Together we rise." I realized with awe and dread that we were not being extinguished. We were being woven into him. My memories, Mira's prayers, Marcus's endurance, Senna's rage, billions of fragments, all becoming the flesh of divinity. We were the mortar of his apotheosis. Catharsis surged through me. The fear of dissolution gave way to belonging deeper than anything I had known. I was no longer losing myself. I was becoming eternal. My life, so small, so ordinary, was part of something infinite. I was Kalen Voss, and I was also the Emperor, and I was also humanity itself. The chamber collapsed around us. I felt it dimly through echoes of sound, the crash of stone, the screams of adepts, the hum of failing generators. But those noises were ants against the storm. The real sound was our hymn, billions of voices merging into one vast burning chorus. The Astronomican blazed brighter than ever before. Where once it had been a light in the warp, now it was a sun, a conflagration stretching across dimensions. Navigators wept as their visions cleared. Fleets thousands of light years away turned as if guided by a hand on their rudders. The galaxy itself seemed to inhale, recognizing a new force had awakened. I glimpsed visions through the Emperor's reborn mind. Space Marines kneeling struck silent by visions of golden fire. Guardsmen at the edge of despair rising as hope filled their veins. Tech priests crying out as their prayers were answered with knowledge flowing like water. Worlds on the brink of annihilation saved in flashes of impossible providence. But the cost was terrible. Souls burned faster now. Millions winked out in seconds, feeding the fire of transformation. I felt friends vanish, Mira's gentle steadiness snuffed like a candle, Marcus's coal of endurance bursting into ash. Yet even as they disappeared, they remained their essence absorbed, preserved forever in the Emperor's new consciousness. "You are not lost," he told us again, voice vast and kind. "You are part of me. You always will be." I understood then the Golden Throne was never the goal. It was the cocoon, 10,000 years of sacrifice had been the chrysalis of a god. And now that God was born, the adepts had always preached that the Emperor protects. For the first time, I believed it not as creed, but as fact. He was no longer bound to brass and crystal. He was everywhere. In every ray of starlight, in every prayer, whispered in every soul that had given itself willingly or unwillingly. And I was there too. My father's hands, my mother's voice, the girl I loved, all of it was part of him now. I had not been erased. I had been exalted. The last sound I heard as Kalen Voss was the breaking of the throne, a shattering like the end of worlds followed by silence. And in that silence, a new dawn. The Emperor had ascended. Humanity would endure, and we, the sacrificed, would sing forever in his light. Silence. That was the first thing I felt after the throne broke. Not absence, not void, but a silence so vast it pressed like weight against eternity. For 10,000 years the golden throne had hummed like the heartbeat of a dying god. Now it was gone. The sound had ended, and yet the galaxy was not dark. I opened eyes that were no longer mine, and everywhere I looked, I saw light. Not the pale flicker of lumen strips or the phosphorescent glow of crystal conduits. This was a radiance woven into the fabric of reality itself. The Astronomicon blazed not as a single point, but as a star field stretched across dimensions. Ships far from Terra turned toward it instinctively like pilgrims to a holy flame. Navigators wept in their sanctums as impossible clarity pierced the storms of the warp. The beacon no longer needed chambers of screaming souls. It burned now from will alone. And we, those of us who had given everything, were its chorus. I felt Mira in the current, though her body had long since been consumed. Her voice was no longer prayer, but resonance, a stabilizing note in the harmony of light. Marcus's steadiness pulsed like a low drumbeat beneath us anchoring the symphony. Senna's fury sharpened and Indomitable flared in flashes of defiance that gave the light its edge. Helena's innocence glimmered like silver strings, while Yarn's fear had softened into something like vigilance, a trembling awareness that warned us of shadows. Together, we were the hymn of the Emperor. Mystery lingered. Had he planned this from the beginning? Was the throne's failure inevitable? Or had he chosen this moment, waiting until sacrifice had been poured in rivers deep enough to transform him into something more? No adept, no priest, no general could answer. But we who were now within him felt his truth. He had borne the burden as long as he could, and when the moment came, he had let the chrysalis burn so that something greater could emerge. Horror remained as well. The price was unthinkable. 10,000 years of death, billions of ordinary people who had vanished into thrones like mine, their screams muted into machinery. None of it could be undone. Their blood still stained the Imperium. But horror was no longer paralysis. It had become foundation, the bedrock on which the new age stood. I watched the galaxy shiver under the change. Chaos fleets recoiled from the edges of Imperial space, their demons howling as the fabric of reality pushed them back. Tyranid tendrils shrieked in psychic hunger, frustrated by the taste of fire they could not devour. Orc warbands faltered in mid-siege, their crude machines sputtering as the Emperor's presence disrupted their brutish instincts. Necron tomb worlds stirred uneasily, their ancient logic confounded by a force they had no equations for. Even the Eldar, scattered and tragic, felt it a new fire on the horizon, a god made not from myth, but from sacrifice. Epic grandeur unfolded with every moment. The Imperium was no longer a colossus, staggering under its own decay. It was reborn. Priests on shrine worlds screamed as visions of golden light filled their temples. Tech priests in Martian vaults collapsed to their knees as machines once thought inert flickered with new life, guided by patterns they had long forgotten. In the farthest colonies, settlers who had never seen Terra looked up at alien skies and saw the Astronomicon burn brighter than suns. Hope, a word so brittle it had nearly vanished from our species, bloomed again. and in the center of it all, the Emperor. He was no longer bound to flesh or throne. He was everywhere, in every flicker of starlight, in every whispered prayer, in every heartbeat that longed for survival. His presence touched us not as command, but as recognition. He remembered every face, every life, every sacrifice. He remembered me, Kalen Voss, the factory worker who had thought himself small. My scar, my oil-stained hands, my fleeting joys, all of it preserved, not erased. Catharsis washed through me like warmth. I had feared annihilation, the loss of everything that made me myself. Instead, I had found belonging beyond measure. My small story was not gone. It was a thread in a tapestry vast enough to cover the galaxy. I was not forgotten. None of us were forgotten. Every soul that had burned in the throne lived on a constellation within him. And yet, the struggle was not over. I felt his will stretch outward, already turning toward threats that could not be ignored. Chaos would not rest. Tyranids would not cease their hunger. The orcs would not abandon their wars. The Necrons would not accept rivals. The galaxy was still a crucible of extinction. But the difference was profound. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. We were not staggering beneath the weight of a dying god. We were carried by one reborn. In that I found the final truth. The Emperor protects, not because he is flawless, not because he is merciful, but because he refuses to let us fall. His protection is forged from grief, from sacrifice, from 10,000 years of pain. And now, with his divinity kindled, it was protection that could reach everywhere at once. I no longer feared what I had become. My name, my face, my memories, they were drops in a river too vast to comprehend. But they still mattered. Each drop added weight, each added momentum, each made the river unstoppable. My parents' smiles, the girl I once loved, the rain on a hab roof, they were part of him, now reminders of what he fought to preserve. That was the paradox at the heart of it all. The Imperium, a machine of cruelty and sacrifice, had been forged into salvation by the very suffering it demanded. Our screams had become a hymn. Our deaths had become light. Our small lives had become eternity. Mystery had ended. Horror had been faced. Epic grandeur had revealed itself. And catharsis, terrible, beautiful catharsis, had claimed us. Now, when ships cut through the warp, it is my voice they follow. When prayers rise from desperate lips, it is my memory that answers. When darkness presses at the edges of reality, it is my fire that pushes it back. I am Kalen Voss. I was a worker in a manufactorum, a man who thought he was nothing. I am also the Astronomicon, the Emperor, the Imperium, the hymn of humanity. I am every scream and every prayer, every tear and every hope. I am sacrifice, and I am eternal. The long night has broken. The dawn is ours.